Eli Gershkovitch, welcome to the show.
Jeff, thanks very much.
Thanks for coming. We've known each other for some time.
We have.
And you were one of the first people that came to mind when we developed this program, because one object of this show is to have lawyers who have gone on to other endeavors and successfully, and talk to the audience about how to do that and what it's like. So thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me.
For everybody who may not know, Eli is the CEO of the Steamworks group of companies. You'll see I have some beer on the table here. My favorite one, which is the Lionsgate Lager, and then we have one made in Germany. I'll get Eli to talk about that later. But you're still a lawyer after 20 years.
Yes.
Can you tell the audience why?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. The first reason is that I still use it every day in one way, shape, or form. It's really a coat of armor going into the modern world. But the other reason is that my Jewish mother is still alive, and she would kill me if I ever let my law license lapse and not be able to say my son the lawyer. So
I like that one.
Thanks.
You know what I found amazing about you, and I'm going to ask you right off the bat, because this is phenomenal. In 2009, you flew a Cessna solo and back from Vancouver to Europe. What made you do that?
I think it was a bit of a personal challenge that I really needed at that particular juncture. I've always been interested in flying, and I became a private pilot, actually relatively shortly after I got my call to the bar, and over the years became more serious about it, got my own plane, and it was just a challenge. It was a technical challenge, it was an aviator challenge to get over to Europe in a single engine, unmodified Cessna 182, and then to make it back successfully.
Where do you stop over the Atlantic?
Well, it's a bunch of hops. So you're taking the Arctic route, so basically one side of the Hudson's Bay, at Iqaluit on Baffin Island, Greenland, Iceland, Faroe Islands, and then once you've made it to Scotland, you're pretty good from there on in.
Right. And there's airplanes on a number of your beers to commemorate that, is that right?
Well, again, one of the great things about having your own consumer brand is you get to indulge your own interests and passions. And so there's always something flying in one way, shape, or form on every Steamworks beer brand.
Okay. Now, I heard that Belgian beer changed the trajectory of your career. Is that right?
That's exactly right, because I went pretty well straight through from kindergarten right to finishing law school without much of a break. So I took essentially a delayed gap year after law school and went over to France to do art for art's sake, and in the course of my time there got exposed to Belgian beer, and it was, again, very different to anything that was commercially available in North America at the time, and I liked this. And then just in the course of traveling afterwards, I saw my first brew pub in Heidelberg, Germany, and sort of one of those few moments of epiphany where I thought, this is big enough to be impressive, but not so big as to be intimidating, and just to be able to do something different. So the idea was to marry the brew pub concept with Belgian beer.
Was that the first thing that inspired you, was seeing that brewery in Belgium?
Absolutely. Well, seeing the brewery in Germany.
In Germany.
So together with, again, a chance to do just something a little bit different, and something that, again, was personally appealing to me to pursue my own interests.
Right. Probably everybody in the audience, when they're not preparing for an examination for discovery the next day or for trial, knows where Steamworks is in Gastown. So can you just tell everybody about the beginning of Steamworks in Gastown, because I know that was novel and there were a lot of regulatory problems with opening up there.
Well, Steamworks is located right at the entranceway to Gastown, and it over the years has made the transition from being flavor of the month to a local institution. And again, I had this idea that I got well over in Europe, but okay, I came back to North America and had to deal with reality. And so I went about life, getting called to the bar and practicing law, but in the back of my mind, always wanted to do something in addition to law. And I just thought that Gastown was the right place to do it, that there was a certain congruity between the craft methods of production used in craft beer and the exposed brick, the post and beam character of the buildings and the neighborhood in Gastown. But the problem was that there was a whole bunch of regulatory hurdles, everything from a local moratorium on new liquor licenses in the Gastown and downtown East Side area, and also rules that said that a pub, and back then a brew pub had to be an actual pub, had to be in a neighborhood. And in the early 90s, Victoria defined a neighborhood, I would say, as a Leave It to Beaver type neighborhood of tree-lined streets and single detached homes. And they didn't actually consider Gastown a neighborhood. So, my job then was to convince the province that there were other types of neighborhoods, and that perhaps we should think of neighborhoods more along the lines of Sesame Street in terms of who are the people in your neighborhood that might not be just suburban residents. And eventually the argument prevailed, and so we got the licensing we needed.
And there was some secret in the original Steamworks building, wasn't there?
Well, it was very, very fortuitous that the famous central steam line, Gastown steam line, that runs really through the cobblestone streets and some of the buildings of Gastown, actually runs through the back of the Steamworks premises. And I liked the space regardless, but so this was really a bonus. And with a little bit of investigative work and speaking to some engineers, we figured out a way to actually tap into the steam line and use it to fire our brewery. So no need for an external boiler, and very, very cost effective. And steam is a great medium with which to brew. It gives you instant heat, and you can turn it off instantly as well, and it allows you real finesse in terms of the control you need to make good beer.
And therefore the name.
Steam really does work at Steamworks.
Therefore the name?
Yep. Because actually it was called something else originally, and I thought it was just a little bit too staid.
Okay.
So
Steamworks Brew Pub in Gastown, the one we all know,
yeah,
started with 6 craft beer. Is that right?
Something like that. Yeah,
Okay.
that sounds about right.
And by 2013, Steamworks was one of Western Canada's largest craft breweries.
It had grown.
Okay. And today, how many beers are there?
Well, usually at any one time we have about 15 beers under production.
Yes.
And we mix it up seasonally, and every now and then beers come and beers go as tastes evolve and change. But that seems to be the approximate number. And you can, certainly if you go to BC Government Liquor Store, you'll find about 15 of our products on the shelf.
And don't worry, everybody there. I'm going to get to the law thing soon, but I want to deal with the beer thing. So, how many employees does Steamworks have now?
Well, at the moment we're about 400.
Okay.
So,
All right. So, what's the biggest selling beer?
it is our flagship IPA. We waited a long time to do. Now, IPA stands for India Pale Ale, and it's pretty much the mainstay of the craft beer movement.
Okay.
And we actually waited a long time because when we did it, we wanted to get it right. And so it was the first really commercially available hazy IPA. And hazy IPAs are an evolution that they're actually a little bit juicier tasting,
Okay.
tropical flavors.
All right. Before I continue, Eli, it was the trip to Europe that I found amazing, but something else I found amazing, and that was during COVID. Steamworks teamed up with VGH and UBC and released something called 7 o'clock Cheer Pale Ale in support of health workers. Can you just tell us about that for a minute? Because for me, that was very impressive. It showed a lot of social responsibility and empathy.
Well, it was just a way of helping out. I think a lot of people wanted to do their part and do what they could. So we decided that, especially with people under lockdown at the time, and we had seen beer consumption increase significantly in terms of packaged product. And we just wanted to do our part to do a special beer with the proceeds going to help the healthcare workers and to help research. And so that's something that we took seriously. We actually did some of our own research in terms of decontaminating masks as a backup because at one point masks were running very low, and we adapted some of our brewing equipment to make masks last longer for healthcare workers.
Every business was affected by COVID, and still today, there's remnants of that.
Yeah.
And so what about Steamworks, the beer industry? How is your business affected by that?
So, on the plus side, our packaged product, we've always been geared more towards packaging, whether it's been cans or bottles. So we actually saw a healthy bump in our packaged product sales. On the other hand, our keg product to other bars and pubs and restaurants was decimated. And another one of the interesting things we were able to do during COVID is what I called liquid for liquidity. So we immediately went to all the bars and restaurants that were our customers who were stuck with kegs of beer and locked down and closed by provincial order, and said, tell you what, we'll buy back all our beer from you. And then we used it to meet the new demand in packaged product. So COVID, was helpful in that respect. On the other hand, a big part of my business is also restaurants and bars, and those were impacted significantly, especially the downtown properties. And I just haven't seen downtown come back since. The office vacancy rate is still high, and Gastown has been affected, and really the downtown core. So that's something that we're still working with.
All right. Let's get to the law part of you now. You received your law degree in the late 80s, is that right?
That's correct, yeah.
I just so you know, don't feel bad about that. I got mine a few years before you, okay?
Thank you.
Okay. Now, you said at one time, and I'm going to quote Eli, and hopefully
gosh.
you weren't misquoted back then.
Well, let's see.
The real attraction of this business, and I think you're talking about Steamworks, is that it is so varied. When I was young, it was a toss-up between wanting to become a creative director at an ad agency or wanting to become a lawyer. What I do with Steamworks really allows me to do both.
That is exactly correct.
Okay, so why did you choose lawyer to begin with?
I chose law for a couple of reasons. First of all, going to school in the early 1980s, going through a recession, perhaps reminiscent of what we're about to go through now. And I think a lot of people were very focused on very structured careers on the one hand. But probably even more importantly, I thought that, okay, it'll be a lot easier to make the transition from law to an ad agency than to, if I don't like it, to go from an ad agency to law. So get the educational credentials first, and then hopefully, if you're so inclined, have an outlet for the creative side as well.
And what kind of law did you practice?
So I started off actually doing labor law, and then when getting called to the bar, I went right into criminal defense work. Just the easiest way to get into court a lot. And as I got a little bit more experience, my practice evolved, and I was doing more and more regulatory work, acting on development applications and liquor licensing. And really, it was in the course of doing all that liquor licensing work that I got the confidence to say, okay, I can do this. I've seen enough of my clients do it. I'd like to do it myself. So I always say it was the highest, best use of my legal education to be able to use it to get what was very difficult licensing, back in the mid-1990s in downtown Vancouver. And so it really was about leverage.
And so was it a difficult personal and professional decision for you to change the focus of your career?
It was, because a lot of my self-identity was wrapped up in being a lawyer.
I can relate to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think in terms of being serious about the practice of law, it does require real focus. And I hadn't planned actually on going full-time into business. But as the business grew, it required more of my time and more of my attention, or it was not going to flourish. And so at the end of the day, I did make the decision to transition, and thankfully the Law Society brought out the part-time membership rules that allowed me to maintain my membership.
I'm not sure whether that applied to brewers, though.
Well, so far, nobody has said otherwise, and as always with the first law of cross-examination, don't ask a question you don't want to know the answer to.
Eli, you're a risk guy. You made that trip to on a Cessna to Europe. How did you deal with the risk, the financial risk of the change from law to being a brewery guy?
Well, let's talking about risk tolerance. I think it's something everybody has a different level of risk tolerance, and I've always had a bit. But I was in a good position in terms of making the change at the time. I was relatively young, single, no kids, no mortgage, so that if all went to hell in a handbasket, I would be able to dust myself off and hang out my shingle and just go back to practicing law full time. So having that knowledge of having that professional background actually helped me, in terms of taking the step to being a full-time entrepreneur. And really, it's just about calculating the risk. And I think as a lawyer, certainly in a better position to assess and make decisions on acceptable business risks. And I just see that many other entrepreneurs who I've become acquainted with, they're always they're never quite sure of the risks. And I think that as a lawyer, having become an entrepreneur, I just had a better ability to assess and decide what risks I wanted to take on.
When you were asked a number of years ago what you would have done differently, you said, take more risks early on. What risks didn't you take?
Well, probably I didn't grow quite as much as perhaps some people could have. I didn't make a big push to become a national brand early, and I didn't take on a whole lot of extra capital or extra investment to have Steamworks breweries and restaurants throughout the province of BC. And part of that was I just really I like having control, creative control of the projects I'm involved with. So that's meant over the years perhaps doing fewer or smaller projects with fewer zeros, but again retaining that control. And it's sort of worked for me. It's still big enough to be interesting and fun. I always say we're a large small business, and so I'm just doing it a little bit later on. We continue to grow the brewery business and markets, and we now we're adding more restaurants.
Well, I suspect control could be fun because I know you're involved to the level of being involved in creating the design of many of the cans. And we talked about before your involvement in design of the Kolsch lager and the Steamworks lager. I know on one of the cans there's an airplane.
Well, not just on one of the cans, on every can there's something that's flying. And it's just an ode.
What do we got on this one?
Well, we've got a flying steam clock, we've got a balloon, and here we actually have an airplane.
Oh, you
Sometimes,
do?
yeah.
That's right.
Sometimes we have flying cameras. Sometimes we'll have a flying fire extinguisher, but usually there's some element, and it's just a way of again indulging one's passions.
And is that because of your love of flying?
It's a love of flying, and it's just it defines it's part of the brand, and brand continuity and brand congruity, and it's a way that again we've sort of carved out a niche for ourselves in the market.
Yeah. So part of this show is about lawyers doing other things and using their legal skills to do that. And you're obviously a perfect example of that. But one important part of that is believing in yourself, that you can do it. And you were asked again some time ago how to bring ideas to life. and you said, to transform any idea into action, you have to first believe in it yourself. So when I get an idea, I first ensure that I believe in it so that I can effectively advocate for it. Now, I know that's your lawyer talking at the end there, but can you tell me about believing in things yourself and how strong you have to believe in something to make it work?
Well, I don't think you should do something that you're lukewarm about, and you probably shouldn't do something that you don't have a lot of confidence in. So, so do your research. As lawyers, one of the things we're usually pretty good at is research. And when you've done your research and you've actually assessed that you think that you're onto something, well then start do your due diligence and start getting other people to try poke holes in it. And in the course, and I'm always advocating for the idea, whether it's a new brand, a new beer, a new location, and then I'm saying, okay, now go ahead and poke holes in it. I'm going to advocate as hard as I can, and if it still sounds like a good idea after putting it to the test, then damn the torpedoes and go for it. And again, I think that this you need to really, you just can't go half measures.
So how does that thought or that idea apply to your business today? Give us an example of something.
Sure. So an interesting one was making the transition from being a brew pub brewery to a full-on production brewery. So a brew pub is a nice model. I'm able to create all the beer I can make, and every drop gets sold and then some, and it goes directly from tank to tap, and I'm able to sell it at full retail margin. A production brewery is very different. All of a sudden, I've got logistic costs, I've got marketing costs, and to add insult to injury, I'm selling it all at wholesale instead of retail. And so it's a very different business from a brew pub. It's all about volume, and it's all about really, in many ways, industrial production. So I had to make a decision, in 2012. Okay, am I going to take the move to go from brew pub to making Steamworks a consumer brand, distributed on a wide basis? And and it took a whole lot of capital, and it sort of got me out of my comfort zone.
Well, that's a big facility. If anybody gets the chance, you want to go see Steamworks facility in Burnaby. What is it, 40,000 square feet?
It's big.
It's big.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As I say, it's
And I can have a beer on your way out because there's a little brew pub there.
Oh, thanks.
So, Eli, you once described law as the necessary grease that keeps the engine running. Okay. Has that changed over time?
Well, I don't think it has. The way I look at it is that, for the most, we live in a complex world, and we need law in a modern society to make things work. But at the end of the day, generally speaking, we're not the one coming up with the next technological innovation. We're not the one building the next building. We're facilitators. We facilitate. And really, what we are, we're agents for our clients. And at some point, I wanted to be principal rather than agent. And I wanted to be the machine rather than the grease. And I think that's a question that a lot of people, again, especially young lawyers, should ask themselves, that at some point, if you start wanting to do your client's work more than actually be a lawyer, then you should probably decide to make the transition. But if you do make that transition, you don't actually have to give up law. It still comes into play, and you'll still get the intellectual challenge of applying your legal skills as an entrepreneur.
Okay, and that was my next question, Eli, and that's the question that is all about this show, and it's about how your law degree has enhanced your success as a business person. And maybe you could just tell us about that generally.
Well, in today's world, what I've found is that law comes up really every day in one way, shape, or form. If you're in any sort of modern business, you're dealing typically with property, so whether it's leasing or buying a property, you're often dealing with intellectual property. You've probably got employees, so you're going to be dealing with employment law, and you're going to be dealing with all sorts of regulatory bodies at various levels. And just having that legal background, even if you're not doing it all yourself, but at least you can understand the concepts and then really act as the company's quarterback in terms of ensuring that those legal matters are taken care of by outside counsel, is really helpful, and I think almost necessary. One of the people that I really admire, for example, is Brad Smith of Microsoft, who went from in-house counsel to is now president of Microsoft and chief legal officer. And on a very, very much smaller scale, I relate to that, because if you ask me my job title, yes, I'm the owner of the company, and I guess people use the term CEO these days, but really I think of myself as Chief Creative Officer and Chief Legal Officer.
Okay. We have a question. I'm going to get to the questions at the end, and I encourage everybody to ask questions. We'll answer them at the end of the show. So this is a question from a listener. I have to admit this listener is quite close to me, but she wanted to ask you this question, okay? What is your edge or skill set that has made Steamworks such a successful enterprise?
Curiosity. Very, very curious about the world, and always reading a lot, always, of course, with the internet, I have unlimited access to a huge encyclopedia, and just always getting a lot of ideas from very different and varied sources. And so I think that's part of it.
So you still like doing research?
I love to research. I can just go down rabbit holes like nobody's business.
Okay.
But I think that's, but we're good at that as lawyers.
So one thing I wanted to ask you was, how did you combine, and I wrote this down, I don't know if it's correct, the logical, rather austere thinking of a lawyer to creating such an innovative business? How do you combine those two things?
Well, there's actually a lot of times where I turn the legal side off.
Okay.
Because in many respects, I'd never get a deal done if I was always in legal mode. Inevitably, you have to say, okay, I can't, there's a risk out there that I can't cover off. I'm going to have to take that leap of faith. And so you have to, and I really found that actually I did have to step away from a complete lawyer's mindset and get into a business mindset.
Because the legal mode is more conservative than what you pretend to do, right?
It's very conservative.
Yes.
So the idea is not to be able to address and avoid all risks, but at least to better assess the risks that you're willing to assume.
Okay. One of the most interesting and relevant things that you told me to today's show, Eli, and I know you wanted to impart this to our audience, was you mentioned to me that whereas so much of the legal profession is so specialized now, business allows you to be involved in a great variety of legal matters. Can you expand upon that for the audience?
Sure. So, I really enjoyed law school and PLTC in terms of the great variety and getting exposed to lots of different areas of the law. But, certainly my experience has been that most lawyers nowadays really need to specialize and focus in, a limited number of areas, or perhaps even just one area. And which I think is a little bit, for me anyway, it's kind of sad. So being an entrepreneur has actually allowed me in many ways to be, almost like an old-fashioned general practitioner who gets to dabble in a lot of different things and know a little bit about, again, a lot of different areas. So again, if you're wired that you're curious and that you really want that, that variety in your life, especially on a legal basis, then actually being an entrepreneur is the closest thing that I know nowadays to being, a good old-fashioned, general practitioner, or maybe being general counsel and in-house counsel is a good way too.
A great use of your skills.
I think it is.
I think it. In a recent, and I've quoted this study a number of times on this show, in a recent International Bar Association Young Lawyers report, amazingly, about 20% of lawyers were thinking of leaving the profession. Any words of wisdom for this group?
Well, I think it takes a certain amount of self-awareness. Again, we've worked so hard to become lawyers that we probably, have not thought about other avenues. And so when we actually get into it, I think it's worthwhile to actually consider the other avenues, but not just dump law, but to figure out actually how to apply it and how to leverage it. So, but at the same time, it was funny going to a reunion, a few years back, and interesting finding my contemporaries. Many of them who'd done the traditional practice of law were probably at that point where they were looking forward to, hanging up, their robes and gowns and basically, hitting the golf links. Whereas I found that my contemporaries who had alternate legal careers, whether it was in private equity, entrepreneurs like myself, or even they were actually perhaps they were thinking, hey, we're just getting good at this, and they were probably less likely to actually think about leaving law entirely, but still finding ways to enjoy and incorporate it.
On another note, and another part of you, because there's a few parts of you, Eli, you own a fleet of collector cars. A couple of Woody wagons, one which I know about from experience. A blue-on-blue 1934 MG.
That's correct.
A 1912 Stanley steamer wagon.
Well, if you're going to own a business called Steamworks, you probably should own a steam car.
And do you still have that 1991 red Miata convertible?
I absolutely have it. It was the first new car I ever bought, and as a young lawyer, picked it up off the lot, and I grew out of it for a while and sent it to my parents for about 20 years, but on the condition that they ever got tired of it or couldn't get in or out of it, that they sent it back. And I've got it back, and I still drive it frequently. Where
did that love of cars come from?
You know what? I think it was genetic. I was born that way, and the first word I could ever remember reading was Cadillac, and I could just say, puzzles and games, cars and planes. That's
okay. So far, Eli, we have Eli as lawyer, brewer, pilot, car collector. This is not a pun, but what else drives you on a daily basis?
Well, I think the need to create. It really is. To do that next brand is what gets me going. To innovate, to do a new location, and I think just a need to feel a sense of purpose and relevance, and being involved in stewarding, a brand and a business provides that, and so I think if I didn't want to make that next brand, that would probably be the time to stop.
Okay. Before I get to the rapid fire questions part of this, which I'm sure you're really looking forward to, so what was the greatest impediment that had to be overcome in developing Steamworks?
Well, originally it was government in terms of licensing and in terms of regulation.
Was that during the time when you couldn't drink on Sundays in Vancouver still?
It was after that time, but there were still lots of, I would say, neo-prohibitionist regulations.
Yes.
And so, again, it was, gentle but persistent suasion to get people around.
You had to. There was actually a plebiscite, wasn't there?
There was a referendum. I had it. So again, and this is one of the things in terms of doing what needs to be done as an entrepreneur versus being in your lawyer's office. I went down personally and knocked on hundreds of doors in Gastown to again put forward my case on an individual basis, and thankfully we had the highest percentage of approval of any referendum at the time. So,
right. So I'm going to ask you a number of rapid fire questions here in the time that we have left. Okay.
Sure.
Idealist or pragmatist?
Idealist.
Okay. Least favorite job in your life?
Sweeping floors at a transit warehouse.
You didn't like that. You didn't like that.
You know what? It's just that I liked washing the buses, but you know what? The sweeping the floor part, it was because it was never done.
Okay. Worst subject in high school or university?
Well, let's see. In high school, it probably, gosh, physics, which is funny because I actually kind of like it now. And in university, no question, civil procedure. There you go.
Lager or IPA?
IPA.
Okay. Now, what's your favorite food to drink with beer?
I like spicy food with beer. So actually Thai,
Okay.
I think goes extremely well.
All right. And who was your most influential mentor?
You know what? Interesting. I would say there was a provincial court judge who was very influential when I was, again, just starting out, who encouraged me, first of all, to go out on my own, and encouraged me, certainly business-wise, and provided, lots of guidance. And where, some folks might have been a bit reluctant to go out there. Again, originally as a solo practitioner, this judge certainly pushed me.
Yeah. Since my other half of my life is an ethics advisor, I will refrain from asking what kind of beer that judge drank, okay?
Okay.
Eli, if you weren't a lawyer or in the hospitality business or a brewer, what would be your dream occupation?
Well, again, I'd be the creative director at a large ad agency. Plain and simple.
What would that look like for you?
It would be me getting to do copy for campaigns for interesting ads, and the only problem is I've actually known a few creative directors, and they've always said to me, you know what, Eli, you've got the best gig because you've got the best client. That's not going to argue with you. You wouldn't believe how frustrating it is seeing what you think is your best work just poo-pooed and dismissed by clients who don't know. So actually I probably do have the dream job as it stands.
I thought you were going to say I have the dream job.
Yeah, but I have one client who
Yeah. So what's the most creative part of the job that you do now?
Well, I would say it's getting in tune with the zeitgeist of what's going on in the public, and taking a whole bunch of very different and seemingly unrelated data points, and somehow synthesizing them into hopefully figuring out what the public wants or what they're going to want.
If you were to sip on a beer on a patio anywhere in the world, where would that be? And you can't say on your new venue on Main Street, okay?
Okay.
Because I've been there. It's a nice place, but you can't say that.
Great. It would actually be on the patio of the old U.S. Air Force Base in Sonderstrom, Greenland. I love Greenland. It is raw, it's savage, it's largely still undiscovered, and but that is a place that is neat.
Speaking of Greenland, you recall a recent president of the United States wanted to buy it, if you remember that.
I do, yeah, but again, they sold that Air Force Base, and it's a neat hotel now.
Right. What do you do to chill, Eli?
Flying actually helps me chill, because again, so much of what I do is often again ad hoc, and again very creative, and I need something that actually requires some technical discipline. And so to really bear down, especially doing instrument flying rules, flying an airplane in zero visibility, in down to 200 feet above ground, requires a lot of focus. And that actually helps me chill.
Okay. And one last question, again from someone close to me, I must disclose.
Okay.
She wanted to ask you, what message would you put on a billboard for millions to see? I thought that was a great question. Don't say a picture of yourself, okay?
Oh, God, no.
Well, that's what I would do. That's what I would do. But obviously it's a good question, right?
It is.
Yeah.
And so...
don't worry, she always stumps me too, okay?
Yeah, so a billboard of what millions would like to see?
What message would you put on a billboard for millions to see?
I would say measure twice, but then really go for it.
Okay, measure twice, but then really go for it.
Yeah.
Okay, that's excellent. Eli, you can read that. The question is, how much did the law degree really help you purely as an entrepreneur? Or are you just a natural business person? Would you have been better off with an MBA?
So I definitely would not have been better off with an MBA because most MBAs are really geared towards larger enterprises. You know, whether it's a multinational or something that is just big. There are a few MBA entrepreneurial programs, but I really think that that law is much more useful to an entrepreneur because while an MBA might give you a few very technical skills, a legal background will give you a much better way to assess, again, risk and again, MBAs, they can do spreadsheets, but at the end of the day, in terms of the go, no-go decisions, I think we're better positioned to make those.
And this question raises a very interesting point. The second question in this question was, are you just a natural business person? So does somebody have to be does a lawyer have to have a natural business part of them to go into business?
I don't think there's such a thing as a natural business person, actually.
Okay.
I think there are people who enjoy some aspects, but at the end of the day, I wanted to make stuff. And again, that goes right back to the whole thing. As lawyers, we deal with concepts and ideas. I actually wanted to make something tangible, and again, this allowed me to do that. But what business people, I think entrepreneurs, I keep coming back to the concept of risk, and business people, again, especially entrepreneurs, are able to perhaps assume a bit more risk and that might make a natural business person.
I see, okay. Well, Eli, thank you for coming on the show. I've been waiting months to have you here.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
And it's everything I wanted, and I hope everybody else out there learned a little bit about the business of law and going into business. And we look forward to seeing everybody in 2 weeks. Thanks again.
Oh, you're most welcome.
Okay.
Thanks.